Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome to the channel. At UFC 272, Jorge Masvidal lost via unanimous decision to Colby Covington, and now he's in a terrible spot. He's on a 3-fight losing streak, and a lot of people are asking what's next for Jorge Masvidal, and that's what this video is going to be. I'm going to try to predict Jorge Masvidal's next opponent, and there's a lot of options for Masvidal. He's still one of the biggest names in the UFC, and if you look at his 3-fight losing streak, it's not the worst 3-fight losing streak to have. Once to Kamaru Usman back at UFC 251 in July of 2020 on short notice. Then he got the rematch in April of 2021 against Kamaru Usman, lost again, this time via KO. And now, most recently, losing to Colby Covington via dominant unanimous decision. Two of the best welterweights in the world. I know it's a 3-fight losing streak, still sucks, but he's losing to top-tier competition, elite of the elite at welterweight. So I think there's still plenty of fun fights left for Jorge Masvidal. And I am going to give you guys 5 potential matchups. I'm going to go from least likely to most likely based on what I think the UFC is probably willing to book. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to give you my personal preference on who I would like to see Jorge Masvidal fight next. So the first fight that I have for Jorge Masvidal is a bit of a wild card. I don't think anyone is going to even guess this fight. If it were to happen, I think it could be a potential co-main event of a big card. If not, maybe a main event. I personally wouldn't want to see it as a main event of a pay-per-view considering both guys' losing streaks. But that is Jorge Masvidal versus Tony Ferguson. Tony Ferguson used to fight at welterweight. There's talk of him moving up to 170. And who wouldn't love Jorge Masvidal versus Tony Ferguson, two legends in the sport of MMA, stylistically fan-friendly matchup. Both guys are on 3-fight losing streaks. Tony Ferguson losing to Justin Gaethje, who's fighting for a title in May. He lost to Charles Oliveira, who is the current lightweight champion, and Beneil Dariush most recently, who is in potential #1 title contention, and his next fight could be for the #1 contender spot. So again, there is massive similarities between Tony Ferguson and Jorge Masvidal, both on 3-fight losing streaks, both legends in the sport, and all 3 of their fights that they lost on their losing streaks against elite competition. I think the fans would really get behind a matchup like this. I think it would be a fun fight regardless of who won. And the UFC typically likes to match guys up who are on losing streaks and kind of get one guy back on track. So bare minimum coming out of this fight, either Tony Ferguson's back on track or Jorge Masvidal's back on track. They're both getting up there in age. They both probably will never be a champion, at least for Jorge, or at least for Tony Ferguson, never champion again because he was the interim lightweight champ. So I think it's a fun matchup. I think the fans would love it, and I have no problem, and I hope the UFC would book this potential matchup. So next on the list is a bit of a wild card as well. I think this one probably won't happen either, but I still think it's a very possible matchup, and I think a lot of fans would get behind it, and that is Jorge Masvidal versus ruthless Robbie Lawler. I would love this fight. Robbie Lawler, a former champion, kind of in a similar situation. He's on a 1-fight win streak right now, but he's dropped 4 out of his last 5. He only has 1 win in his last 5 fights, which is just insanity. But a former champion coming off that win over Nick Diaz via TKO retirement, where Nick Diaz kind of quit mid-fight. But either way, the stylistic matchup between these two guys would be so much fun. And I can't believe we've never seen these two guys fight. Maybe I've missed this, and maybe they fought years ago, but I don't think these guys have ever fought. Again, 2 legends in the sport, 2 guys who are up there in age in the welterweight division. I think Robbie Lawler's like 38 or 39. Jorge Masvidal's 37, I think, going on 38. So what better time now than to match these 2 guys up? I know Robbie Lawler's not in the rankings. Jorge Masvidal's still ranked in the top 10, at least for now. But I would love this matchup. I think a lot of fans would love this matchup. I don't think this one is super likely just because of how big of a star Jorge Masvidal has kind of become, even on the losing streak. I don't know if Jorge Masvidal versus Robbie Lawler is going to draw the fans in as much as some of these other potential matchups I have in front of this. But nonetheless, I would love to see Masvidal versus Lawler. Moving up on the list, I think this next fight has a significant potential to happen. I personally wouldn't love to see it, but it would kind of be fun in a weird way. And that is Jorge Masvidal versus Nick Diaz. Nick Diaz, up there in age, looked terrible in his last fight against Robbie Lawler. I personally never want to see Nick Diaz fight again. I know there's the excuse that maybe he came, out of shape or whatever for that fight, and people want to give him one more chance. So if they do want to give him one more chance, let's see him fight Jorge Masvidal. Nick Diaz called Masvidal out after Masvidal beat up Nate Diaz, which is Masvidal's last win, and obviously that's Nick's little brother. He called him out. Stylistically, the fans would love this. I mean, this fight would be super exciting, but I really don't want to see this fight. I think it's possible because I know the UFC would put this together because it would sell a lot of tickets. But after I saw Nick Diaz at UFC 266 against Robbie Lawler, I have no desire to see him against a top welterweight. And I think Jorge Masvidal is still a good fighter. He's a step below the elite of the elite at welterweight, but I don't think he has what it takes to compete with Jorge Masvidal. But this fight could happen, and if Nick Diaz could potentially come in shape, they could use that whole narrative, oh, well, he showed up out of shape for his last fight against Robbie Lawler, and they could really try to sell this, and I think this could be like a co-main event on a pay-per-view, and I think it would bring in legitimate, tangible pay-per-view buys, and I think a lot of fans would get behind it. Next on the list, and I think this is a fight that also, now we get up the list, I think this is very, very possible, which is Jorge Masvidal versus Nate Diaz, the original BMF fight at UFC 244, which is Jorge Masvidal's last win. They have that weird kind of controversial stoppage where Nate Diaz had that bad cut above the eye, and the doctor decided to stop the fight. And, in this fight, I think a lot of people think there's unfinished business. For me personally, and I was there live, I always like to mention that I was at this fight live in Madison Square Garden. I saw all I needed to see. Nate Diaz was getting destroyed, but I know there's that narrative where Nate tends to come back later in fights. I mean, we've seen it time and time again with Nate. And the UFC floated this idea of rebooking it in early 2021. I remember late 2020, it was rumored, okay, the UFC is targeting this fight for early 2021. It eventually didn't come to fruition. I think a lot of fans kind of weren't super interested in seeing this rematch. There was other matchups for both guys people wanted to see. But what better time than now? You got Masvidal, he's on that 3-fight losing streak. You have Nate, who's on a 2-fight losing streak, but Nate has a loss to Jorge Masvidal and Leon Edwards in his last 2 fights. And why not rebook it? But neither guy's going to be contending for a title anytime soon. And, what better time than now to rebook Jorge Masvidal versus Nate Diaz? And like I've said about all these fights, this is a stylistically fan-friendly fight. Neither one of these guys is going to take a step backwards. Both guys are going to put it all out there. Both guys have decent stamina. Both guys are primarily strikers. I think this is going to be another great fight. I think Masvidal is probably going to win again. But either way, this would be a massive seller. The only reason I think this might not happen is because Nate Diaz is kind of itching for a fight as soon as possible. He's been very vocal online. Meanwhile, Jorge Masvidal, I guess, he didn't take very much damage in the Colby fight as far as significant damage. I think he could probably turn around pretty soon in the next 2, 3, 4 months. But I don't know, how soon does Nate Diaz want to get in there, because he's been clamoring for a fight for what seems like 4 months now. And, maybe they put this fight together, but I think Jorge's probably going to want to sit out for, probably till the end of the year. And I think Nate Diaz might end up fighting like Dustin Poirier or something along those lines. So moving up on the list, and I think this is the biggest possible fight for Jorge Masvidal. I think this is a fight that is very likely to be made by the UFC, and that is Jorge Masvidal versus Conor McGregor. What better time than right now for Jorge Masvidal versus Conor McGregor? Conor McGregor on a 2-fight losing streak. He's only won 1 fight since 2016, and that's being against Cowboy Cerrone. He's coming off 2 losses to Dustin Poirier, 1 via leg break. Supposedly he can return summer, fall of this year. So that would put him right on the same timeline as Jorge Masvidal. There's been talk back and forth over the course of years. There's Dana White making that comment about, oh no, Jorge Masvidal's too big for you. Conor took that personally. And what bigger fight could the UFC make right now? That would be a main event of a pay-per-view with 2 guys coming off losses, or on losing streaks, which would be insane. But, there's no way they're sitting this out as a co-main event. Conor McGregor versus Jorge Masvidal might be the biggest fight the UFC could make. There's some debate about potential other fights, but this would be ginormous. I think this would be a massive pay-per-view seller. And who wouldn't love to see this fight? Again, every fight on this list, stylistically fan-friendly fight. Both guys are going to keep the fight standing. Both guys are going to want to take each other's heads off. And, at this point in their careers, it's just literally perfect timing for both guys. And I have no doubt that the UFC knows this would be a huge fight. it's just a wonder, I would favor Jorge Masvidal in this fight. It's a wonder if the UFC says, you know what, we want to have a massive pay-per-view seller, but at the same time, maybe they want to match Conor up with a more winnable fight, just like they did when he returned after the Khabib loss. They matched him up with Cowboy Cerrone. He had the option to fight Justin Gaethje. He didn't want that. He decided to fight Cowboy Cerrone, who was on a losing streak, which was a much more manageable fight to win. And I think this Jorge Masvidal fight's a very tough fight for him. And then if he loses this one, it's not going to be by decision. It's probably going to be by stoppage. And then you have a guy who's on a 3-fight losing streak, all, via stoppage. But again, huge fight, would make a lot of money. The fans would get behind it. It could headline a massive pay-per-view, potentially even International Fight Week headliner. I mean, Jorge Masvidal versus Conor McGregor would do massive numbers for sure, over 1 million buys. But on the same page, you could put Conor McGregor against anyone and still sell a pay-per-view. I believe you can put Jorge Masvidal, he's not the same level as Conor, but you can pretty much match him up with anyone and it would still be a decent seller, whether it be a co-main event on a pay-per-view or not. So, it's all up to the UFC in that one, but I think that would be an amazing fight and I would absolutely love to see it. And Conor's talked about, wanting to stay at 170, wanting to fight at 170. He feels healthier there. He feels bigger, stronger there. So it makes perfect sense and it's a perfect time for that fight. Now, number one on this list has to have a certain set of circumstances play out to actually happen, but that is Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards. This is a fight the fans want to see. Now, obviously, Leon Edwards is fighting Kamaru Usman over the summer at some point in time. It's not official yet, but Dana White has said this is what's going to happen. Obviously, you have to take that with a grain of salt, but it's looking like Leon Edwards is getting the next title shot. Now, if Leon Edwards loses to Kamaru Usman, I think it would be the perfect time to book Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards. This is a fight the fans have wanted to see forever. Ever since that backstage altercation, the fans have wanted to see it. For some reason, this fight has not been able to come to fruition. They booked it in December last year. I think it was UFC 269. It was supposed to happen. Jorge Masvidal pulls out with an injury and then ends up rebooked with Colby Covington. A little bit weird because of the timing. He pulls out of a fight with an injury, and then like 3 weeks later, he already has another fight booked, not against the same opponent. But if Leon goes out there and loses to Kamaru Usman, Leon's going to be looking for a big fight. He's going to want the biggest possible fight. He's coming off a loss. He's not going to turn around and fight for a belt anytime soon after losing to Kamaru Usman. But that's a big if, because I think Leon Edwards could legitimately dethrone Kamaru Usman. But if he does lose, I think it's finally time for us to see Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards, and hopefully this time it comes to fruition. It's a great grudge match. It's two strikers. Leon Edwards, for the most part, he's not going to go out there and try to take Jorge Masvidal down and hold him down, which we all know is Jorge Masvidal's weakness. I know Leon Edwards is super well-rounded, and maybe he does mix in the grappling in this fight, but I think, again, this is a fan-friendly fight. I think it would be a lot of fun, and you have that whole backstory. I mean, the UFC and Dana White has had to been itching to use that backstage footage for a promotion, for a fight, for literal years. I think, when did it happen? Back 2018, 2017, somewhere along those lines. I don't think it was 2019, but maybe early 2019. So either way, like 3 or 4 years since that happened. I know the UFC wants to use that footage in a promo. I'm pretty sure they probably did for UFC 269. Unfortunately, that fight was canceled. Well, I want to see Jorge Masvidal versus Leon Edwards finally. So if he loses, they'll both be on, coming off losses, and it's time to finally put them together. Now, as far as my personal favorite fight out of this whole group, I think I really want to see, the Jorge Masvidal versus Conor McGregor fight. It would just be so massive. It would basically be meaningless as far as like title picture. But at that point, you have two guys who have super fun styles. Two guys who both come out, look to take your head off. I think that fight would be phenomenal. I think it would be massively important for both guys' career, because Conor, if he loses, he's on a 3-fight losing streak. Jorge, if he loses, he's going to be on a 4-fight losing streak. It would mean a lot. It could headline a pay-per-view. It would do big business. And you could also build some stars on a card like that. You could put, some up-and-coming guys on that undercard. A lot of eyes would be on that pay-per-view. That's my personal favorite fight out of this whole bunch of fights that I gave you guys. But I would also still love to see that Jorge Masvidal Leon Edwards fight as well. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Which of these fights is your favorite? Did I miss anyone to potentially match Jorge Masvidal up with next? Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, and thank you so much for watching.